They were laughing. Thousands of alien nobles, seated in towers of polished obsidian, watching from above as the human bled into the sand. To them, this wasn't war. It wasn't even sport. It was entertainment. The Southern Milky Way had built entire arenas for one purpose: to prove that humanity was fragile, expendable, inferior. The human knelt in the center of Gloradius, ribs cracked, vision blurred, breathing uneven. And still, they laughed, because in their records, humans were classified as biologically inefficient, low-tier endurance, unremarkable strength, emotionally unstable, perfect for spectacle. What they did not realize, what none of them had bothered to study, was that the human was not trying to win. He was trying to understand, and the arena was about to become a classroom. None of them noticed he was counting the seconds between heartbeats. Not his own, theirs. They were not feared. They were not studied. They were purchased. And the betting markets had already decided he would not survive the hour. The transport vessel carrying the latest batch of slaves descended through Arthana's heavy golden atmosphere under armed escort. Shackled inside its lower cargo hold was a human male cataloged under a trade designation instead of a name. Specimen 7 HU 441. But that was not his name. His name was Slitch. And while the nobles of Gloradius saw only a thin, scar-lined biped with restrained wrists and a damaged left shoulder, what they failed to see was far more dangerous. Humans did not enter arenas to perform. They entered them to learn. The gates of Gloradius opened with tectonic force. The structure was not merely large, it was continental. Carved from black mineral stone harvested from Arthana's polar fault lines, reinforced with metallic ribs that pulsed with energy dampeners, the arena was designed to prevent escape by anything short of orbital bombardment. 40,000 spectators filled tiered balconies that spiraled upward like a crown of predatory teeth. Nobles reclined in gravity-adjust thrones, their elongated silhouettes outlined by bioluminescent banners displaying family sigils older than human civilization. At the center of the arena floor, fresh sand was poured. It was not decorative. It absorbed blood. Slitch stepped onto that sand in chains. The crowd reacted instantly. Some laughed. Some recorded. Some placed wagers through neural interfaces connected to predictive combat algorithms. The probabilities were clear. A human's first match survival rate in Gloradius, 3.7%. That number pleased the nobles. The announcer's energy signature flared above the arena, not through voice, but through psychic broadcast across the spectators' implants. The match would begin shortly. The human would not fight alone. 2 additional gladiators would accompany him. The gates across the arena opened. From one emerged a 4-armed reptilian veteran whose body was layered in ritual scars. From the other emerged a broad-shouldered alien with deep cobalt skin and hardened cranial ridges. His name was Zorbad. Unlike the nobles, Zorbad did not laugh at the human. He observed him. 6 more gates rose on the opposite side of the arena. The opponents entered as a unified wall of muscle and engineered aggression, mercenary warriors from a species bred for planetary suppression campaigns. Their skeletal density alone exceeded that of most sentient life forms in the quadrant. Their armor was ceremonial, not functional. They did not expect to need protection. The betting systems updated instantly. Revised survival probability for the 3 gladiators, 0.2%. The nobles leaned forward. The gates sealed. The energy barrier activated. And for a moment, just a fraction of silence beneath Arthana's twin suns, Slitch did nothing. He studied the sand. He studied the wind patterns. He studied the spacing between the 6 opponents. He noted the slight delay in synchronization between the 2nd and 3rd warriors from the left. He noticed the arrogance. Humans had evolved somewhere inconvenient. A world the Council never bothered to study carefully. It was logged as biologically inefficient, statistically fragile. They assumed that was enough information. The horn of Gloradius detonated across the arena. The 6 aliens charged. The crowd roared in anticipation of spectacle. What they received instead was calculation. Slitch did not charge forward. He moved diagonally. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it forced the 6 to break formation. The reptilian gladiator engaged first, absorbing the initial impact from 2 of the attackers. Zorbad intercepted another with brute force. The sand erupted into a storm of motion, and the human disappeared beneath it. To the nobles, it appeared chaotic. To Slitch, it was geometry. He targeted joints, not torsos. Tendons, not skulls. Breathing rhythm, not muscle mass. Within the first 30 seconds, one of the six stumbled, not from overpowering strength, but from destabilized balance. Within the first minute, the second attacker miscalculated a step because the sand beneath him had been deliberately displaced. A noble's neural feed flickered with recalculation warnings. That had never happened in a first-round execution. The crowd's excitement shifted, not yet to concern, but to confusion. The human was not fighting like prey. He was reorganizing the battlefield. The reptilian gladiator fell first, his chest cavity ruptured by a direct, kinetic strike. The nobles cheered at the blood spray. They assumed the outcome had corrected itself. They were wrong. Zorbad adapted to Slich's pattern instantly. Whether by instinct or observation, he began forcing opponents into the angles the human was creating. Two attackers collided mid-charge. One lost visual tracking. Another overextended. Slich used their own mass against them. The third alien fell. Then the fourth. The arena noise dimmed, not because it was quieter, but because disbelief began suffocating enthusiasm. This was not supposed to happen. The remaining two warriors grew cautious. Too cautious. For the first time, hesitation entered their movements. And hesitation, in an arena designed for dominance, was fatal. The fifth opponent collapsed with a crushed trachea. The sixth tried to retreat. There was nowhere to retreat. When the final body struck the sand, the entire Colosseum of Gloradius entered a silence it had not known in centuries. Somewhere in the upper tiers, laughter stopped mid-breath. Not out of sympathy, out of uncertainty. 3 gladiators had entered. One lay dead. 2 remained standing. One of them was human. And for the first time in the long and decadent history of Artana, the nobles did not laugh. They recalculated. They studied the sand. They reviewed the recordings. They tried to understand how an organism they classified as entertainment had reorganized a slaughter. Above them, the betting algorithms failed to process the anomaly. Below them, Slich stood still, breathing evenly, already analyzing something else. The arena architecture, the guard rotations, the positioning of control pylons. He had not come to survive. He had come to map a prison. And somewhere in the upper tiers of the arena, a single noble began to feel something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not excitement, concern, because the most dangerous creature in any empire is not the strongest, is the one that learns while being underestimated. And Gloradius had just made a catastrophic mistake. The nobles of Gloradius did not panic. They adapted. Publicly, they reframed the outcome as novelty, a statistical anomaly, a lucky configuration of variables. The arena thrived on unpredictability, and unpredictability increased wagers. Privately, however, internal surveillance grids replayed the battle frame by frame. The human had not won by strength. He had redistributed force. He had manipulated angles. He had altered terrain. He had forced superior opponents to fight each other without realizing it. That was not instinct. That was cognition under pressure. And cognition, once identified, demanded containment. For the first time, the nobles did not ask how to kill him. They asked how to own him. But containment requires understanding. And they did not yet understand him. And cognition was far more dangerous than brute power. High above the arena floor, in chambers carved into the obsidian superstructure, members of Arthana's noble houses reviewed the data streams in silence. Neural tacticians add just predictive models. Survival projections for future human matches were recalculated. The number rose, not significantly, but enough. Below the spectacle, beneath the sand, beneath the cheering architecture and ceremonial cruelty, the true structure of Gloradius extended like the roots of a parasitic organism. Containment corridors, energy-sealed chambers, shock grids embedded in walls, atmospheric suppressors designed to incapacitate species with different respiratory tolerances. No gladiator had ever escaped, not because they lacked strength, but because Gloradius was not just an arena. It was an engineered ecosystem of captivity. Slich began mapping at the moment he was returned to the holding sector. The chains were removed only after neural compliance scans confirmed exhaustion. The guards assumed fatigue. They did not understand human endurance thresholds. Inside the dimly lit containment chamber, the surviving gladiators were separated by species classification. Isolation reduced coordinated uprising probabilities by 82%. Slich had already calculated that. When Zorbad was escorted past a sector, their eyes met for less than half a second. No gestures, no signals, no visible acknowledgement, but something passed between them. Recognition. Zorbad had felt it in the arena, the pattern behind the chaos. The human had not reacted randomly. Every movement had shaped the field. Zorbad was not a fool. He had survived 12 arena cycles before Slich's arrival. He had witnessed hundreds of deaths. He understood dominance hierarchies intimately. And he understood this. The human had not fought to survive. He had fought to test variables. 3 days passed before Slich's next evaluation. During that time, he observed guard shift intervals, nutritional delivery timings, security relay pulses in the corridor walls, the faint electromagnetic hum that indicated centralized control nodes somewhere above. He tested the weight of his restraints when reattached for transit. He memorized the lock patterns. Humans evolved in environments where survival depended on pattern recognition. Weather shifts, predator habits, tribal rivalries. Ardhanna was no different. It was simply larger. In the upper chambers, one noble in particular continued reviewing the anomaly footage. House Varian's representative was known for strategic acquisitions, rare beasts, unique war technologies, exotic combatants. He began to see not an anomaly, but an investment. If properly positioned, the human could increase arena revenues by 37%. But to increase value, tension must increase. And tension required escalation. The next match would not involve conventional opponents. It would involve spectacle. Meanwhile, Zorbad was relocated to an adjacent holding tier under the guise of performance pairing optimization. The nobles believed cooperative gladiator dynamics enhanced viewer engagement. They underestimated cross-species alliance potential. When the two were finally placed within auditory proximity, separated by an energy lattice that shimmered faintly blue, neither spoke. Speech was monitored. Instead, Slich began tapping a rhythm against the containment floor. Not random, measured, prime number spacing. Zorbad paused, then responded with a shifted interval. The lattice did not detect coded language. It registered idle agitation. Over hours, a pattern formed. Over days, a structure. The arena was mapped in fragments. Zorbad contributed what he knew of upper maintenance corridors used for carcass disposal. Slich contributed guard cadence calculations. One critical unknown remained: centralized access authority. Every containment door, every energy barrier, every atmospheric regulator fed into a master override system. There was only one individual authorized to carry physical master access in case of network failure: the chief jailer, the executioner, the living deterrent, Mohammed of the Anunnaki. Entire rebellions had ended at his feet. Entire species had been corrected by his hands. He was not merely strong. He was engineered. Anunnaki skeletal density exceeded even that of the 6 mercenary warriors Slich had defeated. Their neural processing speed allowed predictive combat response almost equal to advanced AI systems. Their cultural doctrine revered dominance as sacred law. Mohammed was not chosen randomly to oversee Gloradius. He was installed as an insurance policy. No gladiator would ever defeat him, because no gladiator had ever survived long enough to attempt it. When Slich learned this through fragmented rhythm exchanges with Zorbad, he did not hesitate. He recalculated. The master key was not digital alone. It was hybridized, physical authority bonded with neural authentication. To access every cell, to disable every barrier, to open the arena's understructure. Mohammed carried it embedded within a reinforced spinal harness, which meant there was only one way to obtain it. The human would have to defeat the strongest being in Gloradius. But not yet. Premature escalation would increase surveillance. The nobles needed to believe the human was predictable, profitable, controllable, and so Slich waited. Above, the nobles finalized their next spectacle. 2 Jengas would be released simultaneously. Predatory beasts imported from a feral moon in the outer spiral arm, each over 10 meters long, each possessing dual neural clusters allowing independent tentacle articulation, each bred to tear armored vehicles apart. No gladiator had ever survived one. The betting systems prepared projections. Human survival probability, 0.0004%. The betting servers experienced their first overload in 73 cycles. The nobles were pleased. They mistook escalation for dominance. They believed fear would fracture the anomaly. They did not understand that escalation was precisely what the human required, because the more the arena intensified its cruelty, the more data it provided. And somewhere within the obsidian corridors of Gloradius, beneath centuries of arrogance and spectacle, something unprecedented was forming. Not rage, not desperation, a plan. And plans, when executed by a species shaped by extinction-level adversity, had a habit of dismantling empires. The gates above the arena began preparing for the next release. The crowd sensed it. Excitement surged once more. They believed they were about to witness correction. What they were about to witness was refinement. The announcement spread across Gloradius like wildfire through dry atmosphere. 2 Najangas. Simultaneously. Even seasoned spectators had just their posture. The Najangas were not gladiators. They were extinction engines. Imported from a feral moon orbiting a dying star, these creatures had evolved in gravitational instability zones where survival required perpetual aggression. Over 10 meters in length. Musculature layered in fiber-dense coils. Jet black hide capable of dispersing thermal blasts. Enormous saber-like canines designed to puncture armor hull plating. And from their backs extended living weapons, tentacles lined with serrated barbs, each moving semi-independently through dual neural cores embedded in their elongated skulls. 1 Najanga could erase a platoon. 2 were theatrical cruelty. Slitch was escorted alone to the arena floor. No allies. No distractions. The nobles wanted correction. They wanted spectacle. They wanted fear. They expected hesitation. The energy barrier sealed behind him. Across the vast black gates, containment locks disengaged with seismic vibration. The sand beneath Slitch's boots felt different that day. He noted its moisture content. Recently replaced. Looser. The gates exploded open. The first Najanga emerged low and fluid, body rippling like a shadow given muscle. The second followed slower, head swaying with predatory confidence. The crowd roared. The probability matrices stabilized near zero. Slitch did not move. Not yet. The creatures circled, tentacles lashing through the air with audible force. Their dual neural clusters processed movement patterns at blinding speed. They were not mindless beasts. They were adaptive predators. One lunged, faster than any sentient opponent he had faced. Slitch rolled sideways at the final fraction of a second, not away, but toward the second beast's predicted path. The first creature's tentacles tore through the sand where he had stood. He noted something immediately. The Najangas did not coordinate perfectly. Their aggression centers overrode collaborative hunting instincts when prey proximity increased. A flaw, a small one, but humans specialized in exploiting small flaws. The second beast charged from his blind side, jaws wide enough to engulf his torso. He shifted trajectory again, forcing his body between the 2 titanic forms. To the audience, it looked suicidal. To Slitch, it was geometry again. The first Najanga recalibrated mid-lunge, but the second had already committed its mass. Tentacles collided. One set wrapped around the other's forward limb. The beasts roared, a sound that vibrated the arena's structural ribs. The crowd's excitement shifted to unease. This was not unfolding as projected. Slitch sprinted directly beneath the arch of one creature's spine, grabbing a loose segment of tentacle as it lashed past. He twisted, redirecting its trajectory just enough. Just enough. The serrated barbs raked across the opposing beast's sensory ridge. Pain response triggered rage, amplification. Now it was no longer 2 predators hunting one prey. It was 2 predators competing for dominance. They turned on each other. Massive bodies slammed into the arena walls, cracking sections of reinforced mineral stone. Tentacles tore flesh. Jaws locked onto limbs. Slitch kept moving. Not attacking. Guiding. Each time one attempted to refocus on him, he repositioned so the other interpreted motion as threat. Humans did not overpower predators. They weaponized them. Minutes stretched. The sand transformed into churn carnage. 1 Najanga lost a tentacle cluster. The other sustained a shattered forelimb. Blood, thick and dark, soaked into the arena floor. The nobles' neural feeds began flagging abnormal outcome probabilities. The betting systems froze. When the first beast finally collapsed from internal hemorrhage, the second attempted to reassert dominance, turning once more toward the human. It charged. Slitch waited until the final instant. He pivoted sharply, grabbing a fallen fragment of bone from the first creature's exposed rib structure. Not to stab, to redirect. As the second Najanga lunged over its fallen rival, Slitch jammed the jagged bone deep into the exposed wound along its sensory ridge, the same ridge previously torn by its counterpart. The creature's neural signals spasmed. Pain overload, loss of coordination. Its massive frame crashed headfirst into the reinforced wall. The impact reverberated through the entire Colosseum. Silence followed, not the silence of boredom, the silence of recalculation. The second Najanga attempted to rise. It failed. Its dual neural clusters misfired. Then it stopped moving entirely. 2 extinction predators. Neutralized. By 1 human. 40,000 spectators stared down at the sand, trying to reconcile what they had witnessed. The noble's initial fury did not come from the loss of beasts. It came from the loss of narrative control. The human had again reorganized the spectacle. He had turned escalation into demonstration. Slitch stood in the center of the carnage, chest rising steadily. No triumphant gesture. No roar. He simply scanned the balconies. And then, deliberately, he raised his gaze toward the highest noble tier. Toward House Varian. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. It was not defiance. It was evaluation. House Varian's representative felt his predictive implant delay by 0.4 seconds. Fear was not coded into his system, yet something close to it surfaced. The nobles interpreted it as arrogance. Their irritation hardened into something more dangerous. If beasts could not break him, then pride would. The arena required correction. But before the nobles could announce their next humiliation, something unexpected occurred. The human moved toward the center of the arena. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He did not signal submission. He pointed directly toward the upper execution platform where Mohammed observed. The crowd erupted into confusion. The gesture was understood instantly. A challenge, not through words, through implication. The strongest being Ingloradius, the Anunnaki overseer, the living deterrent. Mohammed did not react outwardly, but the nobles felt the shift. The human had just requested the impossible, not in desperation, but strategically. They believed this was ego. They believed humiliation had driven him to madness. They believed Mohammed would crush him publicly and restore the hierarchy. They did not know the truth. The master key rested along the Anunnaki's spinal harness. Every lock in Gloradius answered to it, and Slitch had just maneuvered himself into the only position where obtaining it would be possible without triggering immediate extermination protocols. Above the arena, betting systems attempted to calculate the probability of a human defeating Mohammed. The number failed to render, because no dataset existed. For the first time since its construction, Gloradius was about to host a fight not designed for entertainment, but for revolution. And the nobles, blinded by pride, approved the duel. They believed they were about to demonstrate final dominance. What they had truly approved was the beginning of the end. The announcement of the duel spread beyond Gloradius. It reached orbital stations. It reached noble estates across Ardhanna. It reached the data archives of betting syndicates that had not updated their systems in centuries because no outcome had ever required recalibration. An Anunnaki entering the arena as a combatant was not tradition. It was myth. Mohammed was not simply the chief jailer of Gloradius. He was the deterrent, installed decades earlier when an entire gladiator faction had attempted coordinated resistance. That uprising had lasted 12 minutes. Mohammed had ended it alone. Anunnaki physiology was engineered for supremacy. Nearly 4 meters tall, musculature layered over dense alloy-infused bone matrices, neural conduction speeds exceeding most combat AIs, reaction windows measured in microseconds. His spinal harness, ceremonial to spectators, was not decorative. It housed the master override key, bonded to his biometric signature. He descended into the arena without escort. He did not need one. The sand beneath his feet compressed audibly under his weight. Slitch stood opposite him, still bearing scars from the Najanga encounter. Bruised ribs, microfractures along his left forearm, a partially torn ligament in his shoulder. The nobles were pleased. They saw imbalance. They saw inevitability. They did not see patience. The energy barrier sealed. The crowd did not roar this time. They waited. Mohammed moved first. Not a charge, a walk. Each step deliberate, psychological dominance through proximity. His reach alone exceeded the span of Slitch's entire body. One direct strike would liquefy bone. Slitch had just his stance. Not wide, not defensive, centered. Humans evolved in gravity wells that punished imbalance. Mohammed extended one arm in a testing motion, faster than most species could visually track. Slitch barely evaded the first strike. The air displacement alone knocked him sideways. The nobles felt satisfaction. Correction had begun, but Mohammed did not pursue immediately. He was studying. Anunnaki were not brutes. They were apex tacticians in massive bodies. He had reviewed the recordings of the human's previous matches. He knew Slitch exploited patterns, so he varied his rhythm. Second strike, lower angle. Third, feint. Fourth, rotational sweep. Slitch absorbed a glancing impact along his ribs. Something cracked. Pain radiated. He did not retreat. He mapped. Mohamed's micro-adjustments were precise, but even precision leaves traces. Over minutes, the duel escalated. Mohamed's strikes created shockwaves across the sand. Slitch countered not with strength, but with displacement, forcing Mohamed to expend energy turning, recalibrating, recentering. The nobles began to grow restless. The human was surviving longer than projected. 10 minutes passed. 20. The sun shifted in Arthana's sky. Sweat traced through the sand on Slitch's skin. His breathing deepened. His movements slowed slightly. The nobles leaned forward. This was the moment. But Mohamed had begun adjusting something else. His predictive timing. He attempted to force Slitch into a corner near the arena wall, reducing his angular escape routes. It nearly worked. A direct strike connected. Slitch was thrown across the arena, skidding through sand and blood remnants. Silence rippled outward. He did not rise immediately. Mohamed approached. The Anunnaki raised one massive arm to deliver a finishing blow. And that was when Slitch executed the first phase of his true strategy. He did not roll away. He rolled toward, closing distance inside Mohamed's optimal strike radius. The massive arm descended, but at close range, its leverage was reduced. Slitch locked onto Mohamed's forearm, using his entire body weight to torque the limb off trajectory. It did not endure the Anunnaki. It altered his balance. Slightly. Enough. Slitch targeted the knee joint, not with brute force, but with repeated impact along a singular stress line he had identified earlier when Mohamed pivoted. Anunnaki bone density was immense. But even dense structures possess rotational vulnerability. The crowd began to understand. The human was not attempting to overpower the giant. He was attempting to destabilize him. The duel stretched past an hour. Mohamed's movements remained lethal, but not infinite. Anunnaki endurance was extraordinary. Human endurance was adaptive. Slitch began forcing Mohamed to overcommit weight shifts. Each time the giant corrected, Slitch retreated just enough to preserve energy. Microfractures formed along the Anunnaki's reinforced knee joint, invisible to spectators, not invisible to Slitch. Mohamed adapted again, switching to grappling range. He caught Slitch mid-movement. The impact drove air from the human's lungs. Massive fingers closed around his torso. The nobles rose in anticipation. This was it. They believed strength would end the anomaly. They did not realize the anomaly had been studying strength this entire time. The Anunnaki lifted him from the sand, but Slitch had anticipated grappling. As Mohamed applied crushing force, Slitch drove his thumb into a neuroconvergence point at the base of the Anunnaki's clavicle, not to disable, but to trigger reflexive muscular contraction. Mohamed's grip tightened instinctively, too tightly. His previously stressed knee bore the full redistributed weight. There was a sound, not loud, but decisive, a fracture. Mohamed's stance faltered. The human dropped to the sand, not free, but positioned. And then Slitch committed everything. He drove forward at the damaged joint with relentless, precise strikes, ignoring counterblows that tore skin and fractured bone. The Anunnaki swung wildly. Each impact from Mohamed shook the arena floor. But instability had begun. Balance once lost at that scale becomes catastrophic. Mohamed attempted a final full-body charge. Slitch pivoted at the last instant. The giant's compromised knee collapsed under rotational torque. Mohamed fell. The entire arena felt it. Dust surged upward in a thick cloud. Silence crushed the spectators. No Anunnaki had ever fallen in Gloradius. Archive systems attempted to auto-correct the footage as corruption. They could not classify what they were seeing. Not in recorded history. Not in whispered legend. Mohamed attempted to rise. Slitch did not hesitate. He climbed the fallen giant's torso, using exposed armor seams for leverage. He targeted the cervical junction where spinal harness met biological interface. 3 rapid strikes. Precise. Mohamed's neural system overloaded momentarily. His massive frame stilled. He did not die immediately. Anunnaki physiology resisted shutdown, but dominance had been reversed. The humans stood atop the fallen deterrent of Gloradius. 40,000 nobles stared down at something they could not process. It was not just victory. It was hierarchy collapse. Slitch knelt briefly, not in respect, in extraction. With controlled precision, he disengaged the master override key from Mohammed's spinal harness. Careful not to trigger biometric failsafes, he had studied through rhythm exchanges with Zorbad. He concealed it within torn fabric along his side. The system logged the harness as intact. For now. Then he rose, breathing heavily, bleeding, broken, but standing. The arena had intended humiliation. It had received insurrection. Above, House Varian's representative felt something far worse than anger. He felt consequence, because the strongest being in Gloradius had fallen. And when deterrence falls, fear spreads. The nobles did not yet understand what had truly been stolen. They believed they had merely lost a champion. They did not realize they had lost control. And somewhere below the arena floor, behind containment fields and shock grids, hundreds of enslaved beings felt a tremor ripple through the structure. Not from impact, from possibility. The revolution no longer required probability. It required timing, and timing had just been secured. Mohammed's body was removed under heavy guard. Official statements described the outcome as an unfortunate anomaly. The nobles announced temporary suspension of high-tier matches for structural reassessment. They attempted to preserve control, but control had already shifted, because while the nobles debated narrative recovery, the master key was no longer in their possession. Slitch endured medical stabilization under surveillance. Automated nanite patches sealed external wounds. Bone fractures were compressed and immobilized. He allowed treatment. He needed mobility. 2 days. That was the window. 2 days before biometric audits on Mohammed's spinal harness would trigger full system authentication checks. 2 days before the nobles realized the key was missing. 2 days to dismantle Gloradius from beneath. 2 days before the nobles realized the arena had stopped being theirs. In the holding sectors, tension vibrated through the air like static before a storm. Slitch was returned to containment under increased watch. Additional guards rotated along his corridor. Shock grids intensified. They were cautious, but they were not afraid enough. Zorbad sensed it immediately when Slitch passed his chamber. The human's gait had changed, not weakened, focused. That night, when corridor lighting dimmed to maintenance levels, Slitch initiated the sequence. He waited for the guard cadence he had memorized. 7 steps. Pause. Sensor sweep. 7 steps. Turn. When the rhythm aligned with the blind angle near his containment lattice, Slitch withdrew the master key. It was smaller than expected, dense, layered with biometric circuitry. He pressed it against the energy lattice. The barrier flickered. Not disabled. Testing. He adjusted angle. Rotated orientation. Second attempt. The lattice dissolved silently. Across the corridor, Zorbad's chamber deactivated moments later. One by one, Slitch moved through the holding tiers. Opening, signaling, freeing, not chaotically, strategically. He selected those capable of combat first. Warriors, survivors, individuals who had endured multiple arena cycles. The rebellion would not be a stampede. It would be a strike. Within minutes, nearly 40 gladiators stood free in the shadows of Gloradius under structure. They did not cheer. They did not speak. They understood the fragility of the moment. Slitch divided them with precise gestures. Half toward armory storage, half toward control pylons embedded along the sublevel corridors. The objective was not escape alone. It was disruption. Above, the nobles enjoyed evening feasts beneath suspended light orbs, confident in restored dominance. Below, containment locks across 3 sectors disengaged simultaneously. The first alarm triggered softly. Not yet panic. A minor anomaly. Then a second. Then a cascade. By the time the central system attempted to reroute control authority through backup relays, Slitch had already disabled 2 junction nodes using the master key's override function. Energy barriers across the gladiator sectors flickered unpredictably. Guards encountered freed combatants in narrow corridors designed for one-directional prisoner movement. The architecture of captivity became a maze of ambush points. The first blood of the uprising spilled in silence. Then came noise. Blaster discharge echoed through mineral corridors. Shock batons cracked against reinforced bone. Bodies fell, both enslaved and armored. Slitch moved at the center of it. Not as the strongest, as the axis. He directed movements through hand signals and pre-established contingency patterns. Every fallen guard provided weapons. Every weapon redistributed. Within 10 minutes, Gloradius was no longer an arena. It was a battlefield, The nobles realized too late that containment systems were failing from within. House Varian initiated royal guard deployment from the upper tiers. He had suspected instability since Mohammed's fall. He had been correct. Armored soldiers descended through vertical transport shafts, plasma rifles igniting corridors in violent light. The first wave collided with the freed gladiators near the eastern maintenance artery. Casualties were immediate. The gladiators were fierce. The royal guard was disciplined. Bodies accumulated. Zorbad fought near the front line, using his superior mass to break formation lines. He absorbed multiple direct hits that would have disintegrated lesser beings. He continued advancing. Slitch reached the central control spine, a vertical column of pulsating energy conduits feeding into the arena's primary systems. If the spine fell, upper-tier control would destabilize entirely. He inserted the master key into a concealed override port. The system resisted. Biometric mismatch. He anticipated this. The key required Anunnaki neural echo confirmation. Slitch had prepared for that as well. During Mohammed's fall, he had extracted not only the key, but a fragment of neural interface gel embedded along the spinal harness. He pressed it against the authentication node. The system hesitated, then unlocked. Energy fields across Gloradius destabilized simultaneously. Upper-tier balconies trembled. Spectators fled. For the first time in its history, Gloradius felt vulnerable. But vulnerability triggered escalation. Royal Guard reinforcements doubled. Heavy weapon units entered the sub-level corridors. The rebellion shifted from calculated disruption to open warfare. And that was when Zorbad fell. A plasma burst pierced through his torso as he shielded two smaller gladiators from concentrated fire. He did not collapse immediately. He turned once, scanning the corridor until his gaze found Slitch across the chaos. He stood for several seconds, longer than biology should have allowed. Then he fell. The corridor did not echo. It absorbed the moment, and something inside the human recalibrated. The moment fractured something inside the human. Not control, not clarity, but restraint. Humans evolved with emotional circuitry that amplified under threat to tribe. Zorbad had become tribe. The corridor narrowed. The royal guard advanced. Slitch stepped forward alone. The master key still secured along his side. The system spine destabilizing behind him. He did not retreat. He accelerated. What followed was not elegant, not strategic, not restrained. He closed distance before rifles recalibrated. He broke armored visors with bare hands. He redirected plasma bursts into clustered formations. He used fallen weapons with mechanical efficiency. Every motion carried purpose. Every strike carried momentum. The corridor became impassable with bodies. The gladiators rallied behind him, not because he commanded, because he advanced. Above, nobles attempted evacuation through private transport decks. But Slitch had anticipated that route. The central spine override extended to docking bay locks. As he moved through the final defense ring, he triggered release of hangar containment fields. The Imperial vessel nearest the arena's eastern flank powered up under unauthorized command. Gladiators poured toward the docking corridors. Soldiers attempted to seal bulkheads. Too late. Slitch reached Zorbad's fallen body briefly. He did not kneel. He did not hesitate. He carried the memory forward instead. The last defensive line collapsed. The gladiators boarded the vessel. Engines roared to life. Autonomous targeting systems attempted override, but the master key still held priority. The ship tore free from Arthana's surface, blasting through lower atmosphere defense grids as Gloradius burned beneath it. Across noble estates, private feeds went dark. For the first time, they were the spectacle. Explosions rippled across the arena's upper tiers. Not total destruction, but humiliation. From orbit, the Colosseum of Gloradius no longer looked invincible. It looked wounded. Inside the stolen Imperial vessel, the surviving gladiators gathered in stunned silence. They were no longer prisoners. They were fugitives. Slitch stood at the forward viewport as Arthana diminished below. He did not celebrate. He calculated. The nobles would retaliate. Empires do not forgive public humiliation. But something irreversible had occurred. For centuries, Gloradius had displayed dominance. Tonight, it had displayed vulnerability. Across the southern Milky Way, data streams began carrying footage of an Anunnaki falling, of beasts turning on themselves, of an arena burning. And with that transmission, a dangerous idea spread faster than fear. Humans were not entertainment. They were catalysts. And empires built on spectacle crumble quickly when the spectacle turns against them. The ship entered faster than light drift. Behind it, Artana smoldered. Ahead of it, a galaxy recalculated. The Imperial cruiser tore through the upper atmosphere of Artana like a scar being carved across the sky. Behind it, the planet burned in outrage. Alarm towers across the capital of Artana flashed crimson. The nobility screamed for retribution. Entire military fleets were mobilized within hours. The humiliation was total. A human slave had not only survived the Colosseum of Gloradius, he had dismantled its foundation and stolen a royal vessel. But they did not understand what had truly happened. They thought they had lost slaves. In reality, they had created a symbol. Empires fall in two stages. First, they are laughed at. Then they are studied. Inside the commandeered Imperial cruiser, wounded survivors lay across metallic corridors that once housed royalty. The freed gladiators moved slowly, battered but alive. Some had lost limbs. Some had lost siblings. Some had lost entire worlds long before Artana. But for the first time in their lives, they were not property. Slitch stood at the front observation viewport. The planet that had enslaved him shrank in the distance. His hands were still stained with blood. Not trembling, not regretful, focused. Zorbad's final request echoed in his mind, not as grief, but as directive. This was not an escape. It was the beginning of a campaign. Back on the surface, investigations tore through the rubble of the Colosseum of Gloradius. They found Mohamed's broken body. They found noble corpses torn apart with unnatural brutality. They found slave quarters empty. What they could not find was control. Rumors began to circulate in the lower districts. Servants whispered of the human who defeated 6 war beasts, who manipulated Najangas into killing each other, who shattered an Anunnaki chief jailer in single combat, who slaughtered nobles in their own halls, and who flew away in a stolen imperial ship. The narrative the aristocracy tried to spin was simple. A savage animal escaped containment. But among the oppressed, the story was different. A human proved they were not gods. Across nearby systems, word spread faster than official reports could suppress it. Slave traders hesitated before purchasing humans. Arena owners recalculated risks. Military strategists began studying recorded footage of Slitch's fights. They saw something terrifying. He did not win because he was stronger. He won because he adapted, because he learned, because he turned arrogance into weakness, because he weaponized their pride against them, because humans do not fight to entertain. They fight to survive, and survival makes monsters out of prey. Weeks later, encrypted messages began appearing across underground slave networks in the southern Milky Way. No name signed them, no origin traceable, but they carried a single symbol burned into the data stream. A stylized mark resembling a shattered chain wrapped around a rising star. It became known as the Mark of Gloradius. Whenever it appeared, revolts followed. Cells formed. Guards disappeared. Keys went missing. Supply routes failed. Colosseums in neighboring systems reported incidents. Some blamed pirates. Some blamed rival houses. But those who had been in Artana knew the truth. This was not piracy. This was strategy. On board the stolen cruiser, Slitch studied everything. Ship schematics, imperial encryption protocols, military doctrine. He trained daily, not to fight for spectacle, but to build something sustainable. He did not present himself as king. He did not declare himself leader. But every free gladiator deferred to him naturally, because he had already proven something no speech could replicate. He had walked into certain death and made it kneel. That kind of credibility cannot be manufactured. It is earned in blood. Months after Artana, a transmission hijacked several aristocratic broadcast channels simultaneously. It lasted only 32 seconds before being cut. It showed footage of Mohamed falling, footage of nobles dying, footage of slaves breaking chains, and at the end, the Mark of Gloradius. No words, no threats, no demands. The message was simple. You are not untouchable. In elite war rooms across the southern Milky Way, analysts debated what Slitch represented. A terrorist, a revolutionary, a strategic anomaly. But one conclusion remained consistent. Human slaves were no longer low-risk assets. They were variables, and variables break empires. Far from Artana, the stolen cruiser exited warp near a fringe system rich in asteroid fields, perfect for concealment. Inside the ship's hangar, survivors prepared smaller crafts for deployment. Scouting, recruitment, sabotage. Expansion. Slitch looked over them, not as slaves, not as gladiators, but as the first generation of something new. The galaxy had built arenas to watch humans bleed. Now it would watch them organize. The southern Milky Way had cheered when a human was thrown against monsters. Soon, it would learn what happens when the monster is human. And this time, there will be no audience safe behind marble walls. And empires that underestimate adaptation rarely survive it. They built arenas to measure human weakness. They forgot to measure human patience.